Morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you, Kim.
Yeah, nice to see you as well. Got the sun shining behind you.
Yeah, it's, believe it or not, that's with like the blind closed. It's too sheer.
Right.
Doesn't do much to help.
Are we supposed to use video for this one?
Yeah, sure. I say it's up to personal preference. Good morning. How are you guys? Oh, Carrie, we can't hear you.
Oh.
Oh, now I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you, yeah. Hi, Catherine.
Super early, hey?
Not super early. It's nice to get here a little early.
Yeah.
I'm going to go make a few quick steps.
Okay. Yeah, now's the time to grab the coffee. That's what I'm going to do. Try to caffeinate. How are things going for you, Carrie? You working from home?
Yes, I do actually work from home normally.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Really isn't much different except for I have the kids here and then they're teens. So I've been letting them kind of keep their own schedule for schoolwork. So it's usually like noon to 4 kind of thing.
The typical teenager.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just said as long as they get it done, I don't care when they start.
Yeah. Well, and that's actually a pretty nice way of doing things.
Well, and it gets me like I'm able to just get my work done in the mornings then.
Yeah.
And then I can help them a little bit.
Yeah, it's tough having the kids at home for sure. At least teens are like, they're old enough to kind of understand. Like, no, you can't.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm kind of thankful that my husband still goes into work. Like they laid everybody off, but he still goes in to answer phones and stuff like that. But yeah, but we're not both trying to work from home, or he's so disruptive anyways. Hey, Laura.
Hi, everyone who's joined.
Hello.
Hi. We have about 5 minutes before the call will start. So if you guys want to just unmute and chit chat, you're more than welcome to. There's the chat box too.
I have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old at home right now, so I'm feeling some of the pain.
You are busy.
Yeah.
I have a 3-year-old and I call him a three-nager because he has all the attitude of a teenager in the body of a 3-year-old.
3 was a very difficult stage. I always heard about terrible 2s, but
yeah,
it was
they're lies.
Yeah.
lies. Yeah.
Somebody told me it's trying 2s, terrible 3 and effing 4s, so I don't know.
My mom always said 5 was the worst, so I think it just gets progressively
worse. Getting extended.
Although if you ask her this year, she might say 33. How old I am? Yeah. It's probably her worst year.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Mm-hmm.
Whoops.
So we're expecting 28 people today that had registered for this session. So
That's great. Well, we'll give it a few minutes, and obviously we'll wait until at least 9, and then maybe a minute or two after, just to let everybody get the kinks worked out of joining Zoom. And
sounds good.
Starting meetings at 9 always, if people start at 9, if they're just getting into the office and stuff, if they're still in the office, or making their coffee or whatever.
I found the Starbucks chai latte stuff in the grocery store, so I can have Starbucks at home now. It makes me happy.
Ooh, that stuff's pretty good. I think I bought some of that at Costco once, and of course, Costco comes in the 2-packs and stuff, and I forgot about one of them, and it stayed in my cupboard for an embarrassingly long time, and then of course, by the time I found it, it was expired, and I was very sad about it.
That is sad. It's really good. The problem is, though, it's really easy to drink way too much of it when you have it at home and you're not paying $6 for it.
I got like a fancy set of different flavored teas for Christmas, and I put them in my drawer at my office, and I didn't grab them when I left, so I know they're just sitting there. Gonna have to do a trip in to grab those.
Yeah, you're missing your tea.
Yeah. Luckily, tea will last. Tea should last. You should be fine. We're moving over the next few weeks, so I've been trying very hard to drink up my stash of tea so that I don't have to, move it, because I have an embarrassing stash, and I have not even made a dent. It's kind of scary.
That's a lot going forward. You have to move soon. Move at the end of the month?
Yeah, well, not necessarily the end of the month. We're technically here until June, but originally the plan was to stay until Riker was done school and then move. But he obviously doesn't need to be going to school, so the new place is ready now. So I currently rent from my parents, so it's actually kind of, the sooner we can get out, the sooner they have time to do some of their fixes before they rent it out again, because there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah, I have way too much stuff though, and it's a lot. And the worst, you can't even really purge right now because none of the like Goodwill and stuff, like nobody's taking anything, so
Yeah,
I'm just kind of packing up boxes of these need to go away, but I can't take them away. I'm gonna have to move them.
Could you check with Hope Mission or something? They might be accepting things still.
Oh, okay. Hope Mission?
Yeah, in Edmonton? Are you in Edmonton?
No, I'm in Calgary.
Oh, okay. I'm sure there's somewhere like that in Calgary because the places that are feeding people are still open.
That's a good idea. Like some of the stuff would be usable, like clothes and stuff. I work with Calgary Alpha House Society a lot. And they do like homeless rehabilitation kind of stuff. And you're right, they would still be open. I don't think they're going to take my tchotchkes and stuff like that, though. So. It's okay. Did y'all have a good Easter weekend? A little different this year?
It was pretty quiet.
Yeah. Did the bunny visit anyone? Any particularly yummy chocolate?
sadly, no.
Oh.
No little kids here, right? So I tried to get Cadbury mini eggs, the crunchy ones, on my grocery order, and no, they didn't have any.
Oh, that's too bad.
I guess they knew I was old. I didn't need it.
Oh, you're not old.
My husband was super cute, and we didn't have the kids this weekend. He went and he put like Hershey's Kisses all over the house. So I went into the bathroom and I found one on like the tap, and then I found one on my piano. Like everywhere I went in the house, he had Hershey's Kisses.
That's
Oh, nice.
cute. Oh, I love the egg hunt ideas.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we still are missing a few people from the list, but they might join us in a few minutes. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time because it is a few minutes after 9 now. So is okay if we get started? Yeah, okay. I will share my screen. Okay, and Catherine, are you okay to watch the chat box and stuff? Moderating? Perfect.
For sure.
Thank you. Okay. Get this to full screen. Perfect. So thank you guys for attending today. This is the second part of a longer session. So we did the first part last week, and I know some of you were on that call. If you weren't, we can definitely share that link with you. The first part of the call was talking about working from home, working remotely, and working in remote teams. And then today's topic is going to focus more on how to do outreach activities when we have to stay in. Our world's a little bit different today than it was a couple of months ago. So our outreach plans are having to change really quickly. Introduce our speakers. I guess I have a slide on our speaker, so I'll introduce ourselves in a second. We're here obviously because of this novel coronavirus. Things are changing quickly. We can't really gather in groups right now. If we have a strong collective response, we'll keep that capacity or that curve below the healthcare system capacity. If we do it for just a short period of time, obviously we're going to have that peak again. So no, I don't think any of us has the crystal ball right now to know how long this is going to go on, but chances are it's going to be probably at least through this summer season and perhaps longer than that. So we're going to consider this our new normal for the purpose of this conversation. So as I mentioned, we had the first session last week, working from home and remote teams. This week we're going to talk today, and then we're going to host this session again tomorrow if you know anybody who is missing it today. And this session is going to focus on non-contact outreach and looking beyond the pandemic. The whole point of doing these sessions is that we can hopefully use some of these tools certainly now while we're dealing with this crisis, but also into the future when perhaps outreach is still going to look different. Even once we're able to gather again, there could be some people who sort of have a PTSD almost about being in large groups. And we also may just realize that some of these tools are actually quite helpful to us. So we do kind of have that end game in mind. And just want to say a quick shout out. Thank you to Ken Lewis at Red Deer County, who sort of got the ball rolling and encouraged Alberta Agriculture and Forestry and ALUS Canada to take a little bit of a stab at this and share the knowledge that we have. So, so your presenters today, I know some of you on the call, but not everybody. My name's Christine Campbell. I am the Western Hub Manager for a nonprofit called ALUS Canada. We work in Alberta specifically, we're working with municipalities to run our program, which works with farmers and ranchers to basically implement projects that increase ecosystem services like cleaner water, biodiversity, wildlife habitat, that kind of thing. And sort of we took up the mantle for some of the work from home stuff initially because we have been a work from home organization at the national level for the last 6 years or so, basically since ALUS Canada became an entity. So while we are far from the experts in the field, we had a little bit of expertise or tips and tricks that we picked up along the way that we could share. So, and we have Katherine Rogers. And Katherine, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Katherine Rogers. I've met a lot of you already before. I work for Alberta Agriculture and Forestry on some of our grant programs. So the CAP programs, including the Environmental Stewardship and Climate Change Producer and Group programs and the Efficient Grain Dryer programs. So a lot of my job is outreach. So that's why I've been very interested in this topic and kind of how we can continue to engage with producers while we are at home and help them in being able to access these resources that are there for them. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing what Christine says, and then also any tips that you have, you can always write them into the chat box and stuff too, so we can discuss them as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. We want this to be kind of interactive, so feel free to share, like jump into the chat box. There's a few spots that we'll pause, you can unmute. We'll kind of keep everybody muted, probably just for sound quality. But if you do want to speak up, just unmute yourself and just kind of, we'll watch the mute windows so that hopefully we can see. And if we don't notice, just kind of give us a cue. And then I don't have a photo, but we are adding one speaker today, Laura Ung. Laura, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure, of course. Sorry, I saw the pictures come up and I thought, shoot, I forgot to send a picture.
That's okay, I realized this morning.
Dropped the ball, yeah. I apologize, but I have my video on so you can see me. Thank you, Christine. My name is Laura Ung, and I'm also with Alberta Agriculture and Forestry. I'm an evaluation specialist. So lots of my role is around that measuring and evaluation, monitoring, reporting, that kind of fun stuff. And so I participated in the pilot of this presentation and thought, well, it might be good to slide in a slide or two to help you guys on the how do you sort of measure and evaluate online or remote learning, because you won't have that necessarily that same feedback that you would get in a workshop. So just how can we do that? So I volunteered myself to do that. So that's everything. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's really great information because I think it is a piece that a lot of people are going to struggle with doing differently this year. So I know Laura provided a lot of really great feedback. Most of you probably received a pre-survey before this, where we were sort of exploring what topics were of interest and just sort of making sure that this was something that was going to be helpful to the extension community. And yeah, that expertise was really valuable. So. Yeah, so how can we actually do outreach without reaching or going out? It's a little bit of a dilemma, and for those of us who our jobs really rely on being able to do this kind of work, I think there's a lot of pressure or nerves maybe about how we're going to be able to continue this in the light of COVID. As I said, I think it's really interesting that we will have a lot of these skills now in our toolbox. So potentially some of these tools might be able to be helpful for a longer period of time. And I say that because remote kinds of outreach do have a lot of benefits. They're open to all. There's no barriers in terms of access by geography or travel restrictions. There's no barriers that way, so you can have a broader audience. You're able to share resources quite easily. You can record your webinars and then share them afterwards. And this is the part that I realized I forgot to say, that this meeting is recording, just so that we have it for posterity. Does anybody have any concerns with recording and potentially sharing that? No? Okay. If you do, you can always reach out privately afterwards. Yeah, remote outreach can build your community, in fact, because you can potentially engage a little bit more frequently, because you're not relying on people to maybe drive an hour to come in for a session that then you feel has to be a half-day workshop. You can do these little like 1-hour sessions, or 45-minute touch bases, and just touch base more frequently. They are also arguably less expensive, depending on, of course, the platforms that you choose and the events that you would have alternatively run. I know in a lot of the outreach that we do with ALUS, we're talking about tours where we're renting a bus and we're buying lunch and those kinds of things. Certainly those costs we're not going to have if we're doing outreach, but you might have to buy a Zoom license or a GoToWebinar license or something like that. And we did talk last week fairly in depth about a lot of these different tools that you can use for remote outreach. So we're not really going to touch on them today. We're kind of working under the assumption that people have that knowledge. But if there's time at the end of the session and you want us to go back, we can always go through a few of those slides if you want more information. And we can definitely share the link to last week's presentation if you missed that too. Also, as Laura alluded to, you can measure your results. There are a lot of different tools to do so. And typically it's fairly easy to count, number of participants and things like that. It's easy to add on your calls to action. So for instance, you could have, at the end of a webinar, you could have a click the link to donate if you're a nonprofit, or click the link to start filling out your EFP, or whatever the case may be. And you can repurpose that content. So for instance, if we were recording this webinar and wanted to share it with a broader audience, we could take just a little 10 or 20 second snippet out of it and post that to social media. Or if I had somebody who was just interested in learning about one particular idea out of here, I could pull that out and not have to recreate that content if it's been recorded. It's also really easy to bring a friend, because again, you don't have any of those travel restrictions. You have relatively easy ways of sharing the information. You can either share it in advance, of course, by inviting people to sessions like this, or if you're like me, often I will see something that I want to go to, and I think, well, this looks great. It looks like a great event, and I kind of think maybe Kim would be interested in that. Well, I don't know for sure. I don't know what the quality of that content is and that kind of thing. And so I tend to be a little bit hesitant sometimes to make those invitations. But then when I'm sitting in the session, I'm like, oh man, no, Kim would have loved this. So again, if you've recorded it and you share that link with participants afterwards, then it does make it really easy for them to bring a friend. They can just forward that on. Arguably as well, these kinds of events may be more environmentally friendly in terms of carbon footprint and that kind of thing. Styrofoam plates or anything like that. And when you do get to meet up in person, it does make those more meaningful. You have a little bit of sort of interaction to build off of. And the one thing I'm kind of loving about people working from home is that I feel like it's almost a little more personal, like we're kind of getting to know each other in a very different light. Okay, so all of that said, remote outreach is great in a lot of ways, but it is not without its challenges. I think the biggest thing that I've heard in the last few weeks has been rural connectivity. Some people, particularly in our rural extension world, just don't actually have good, reliable access to the internet. Added to that, everybody in the world is trying to use some of these pieces of technology. So servers for software like Zoom might be overloaded. Lack of technical knowledge too is a challenge, either on our end where we actually don't know how to host webinars and do things like that, but also the worry is on our outreach clients end. So a lot of us are, of course, working with agricultural producers and things like that, people like that. It can be a little bit daunting, especially if you're talking to somebody that doesn't even have an email address, right? How can we expect them to get onto Zoom or some of these sorts of platforms? Lack of instant feedback too. It is a little bit different when you're talking to a bunch of boxes in the corner. It's nicer when people have video on. It's not maybe quite as daunting, but if they're just a bunch of black boxes, you kind of feel like you're talking to yourself. And some people don't want to share their webcams. They have privacy concerns, or they're just not comfortable with that technology, or they're worried because the 3-year-old's made a mess in the background, whatever the case may be. And sometimes it is just a bandwidth issue too. I've talked to a lot of people lately that have had to turn off their video just because it's cutting in and out for them. Moderation too can be difficult if you're kind of a solo team running the show, and you're trying to monitor the chat box and watch for people to unmute and deliver your content. That can be really tough. It's also really easily solved by bringing in a colleague or friend to help moderate with you. And there's free and paid services of most of the platforms out there. The free versions usually do have some kind of limitation. So we're using Zoom today. The free version of Zoom has a 40-minute sort of cutoff time. So it works if you're doing a quick one-on-one check-in call, but it's probably not going to work for a webinar or something like that. And they can be less engaging. Like be honest, if you're scrolling Pinterest or checking your email or petting the dog or whatever right now. We all kind of multitask in these things. So. Okay, so we're just going to launch a poll here. So we're going to ask, what is your biggest concern about doing your outreach work remotely? And let me just get that up. We'll give that a few seconds. And I think I set it so that you can select more than one if you have a couple that are sort of warring for first place for you. For a couple more people, like 5 more seconds. Okay. So I'll share those results. You should be able to see them on your screen. So Not surprisingly, most of you are worried about your participants being interested in this kind of thing, and their technical capabilities, and followed fairly closely by your own technical capabilities. So that's kind of the point of running these sessions, is to just build everybody's confidence in using these tools. And then in the chat box, Katherine says, concerns about internet cutting out during presentations. Yeah, if you're the presenter and you're having internet challenges, it's kind of a huge deal. In 2016 census said about 60% of our municipalities producers use the internet for their farming business. Yeah, so I think that's a good point. So we've had a lot of these conversations in the past. We've run this presentation with the ALUS team, both out here in Alberta and then again in our Prairie and Eastern hubs. And as I said, we did the first session of this last week. And what I think is a really salient point is that people are smarter than sometimes we want to give them credit for. Ken Lewis, who had recommended doing this in the first place, said the first time he saw a smartphone was in the hands of an 85-year-old farmer. And I think that speaks volumes, because farmers particularly have often been the first ones to step up to a challenge and try something new. So I think we need to not assume that people are not going to do things or be interested in things. I think we need to try and experiment. And this is our year of experimentation, where we actually have a little bit of that freedom to do so. Funders are going to recognize that things are going to be different this year. Probably bosses and supervisors are going to recognize that things are going to be different. So if our outcomes and our metrics are a little bit different, I think that might be okay, right? So we will probably never have this opportunity again. Let's take advantage of it. And the other thing is that the world is kind of pushing these things forward, right? So it's not you or your organization trying to cram something down somebody's throat. The entire world, everything that they're involved in, is probably going to try to move to these things. And so it's kind of a soft sell for it. And hopefully by the time this is all over, we're all going to have this new skill set that is not, that we may not have built otherwise. So, and Sarah says different ages of producers, some older ones would just not be open to it. The younger generation is more open. And I think that's totally true. So I guess my question to you is to think about your regular outreach. And even with your in-person events, do you get everybody that you would like to attend your sessions? My guess is probably not, right? Because there are people that they just don't have time or whatever. Like, we're always going to miss a segment of the population. And yeah, you know what? There might be people that we miss through online events. We do have a couple of non-online things that we'll talk about though too. So. Okay, so how do we address some of those challenges? First of all, we don't want to overcomplicate it. I think when I talk to a lot of people who are really nervous about this kind of technology, it's because they think it's super complicated, right? And really, at the end of the day, all that's needed is a laptop or a smartphone and an internet connection. So that could be like a wired internet connection on their computer. Or a lot of these tools also work on mobile, so they might be able to use 5G or something like that is a little bit more stable. But knowing those limitations of your audience, or alternatively their skill set, understanding what their internet options are and what sort of platforms they are familiar with is a good place to start. Like I said, my caution though is just don't assume that you know, ask them or give them the opportunity, right? It doesn't It doesn't take a lot to try running a webinar. And if you get a little bit of uptake, cool, you might get a little bit more next time. But you know, as much as possible, you want to meet your audience at their level, but build in baby steps and give them a chance to learn. So a great example of this is if you're hosting a webinar, make sure that you also have just a simple call-in option. Yeah, they might not be able to see your slides, but they can listen in. And everybody knows how to use a phone, so they might be comfortable with that first step. Then maybe next time they will consider joining to see your screen, but maybe they don't want to put their video on. Cool, that's might be step number 2. Then maybe third step is that they are actually fully participating and using all of those pieces. So all of that said, as much as we're kind of focusing on the new, because that's what people need to learn about, the classics never die. So don't be afraid to bust out your telephone or send that email. You do your regular mail outs and newspaper ads. Radio, television ads might kind of be back in vogue this year. And then handwritten notes and letters as well. I have a slide a little bit later on that, so we'll talk more. You could step it up one more notch from that. A lot of producers these days, I'm finding, are liking text messages, e-newsletters, social media, blog posts. Again, you're probably not hitting your entire demographic, but there is a demographic that is starting to enjoy those kinds of platforms. And this might be the year to experiment within that demographic that typically hasn't been the target, I find, in a lot of rural remote outreach. So, you know, maybe it's a time to play around with, you know, social media ads or putting more video content out there, whether it's via YouTube. A lot of producers do seem to like YouTube, and it's really accessible. All people need is a link. You don't have to download any kind of software or anything like that. So somebody that might not have attended your Zoom call live, they might be willing to listen to the recording on YouTube, right? And with YouTube, they have a number of settings. You can make things private. You can make things, oh, I forget what they call it, but basically people need to see the link, so they can't search your YouTube video. So that's the way that we've uploaded these webinars, for instance. And then sharing short videos with just tidbit size info. The way people's brains are going is more, well, it's just shorter attention spans. So you will, scientifically speaking, you are more likely to get more views with short videos of 30 seconds to a minute length than you will for an hour webinar or something. So think about how you could break up your content maybe and share it in those really accessible formats.
Kim had asked if the free Zoom allows for phone participation. So I don't know if we talked about that a bit, Christine, and I think that it isn't a Canadian number to call into.
So Zoom, from my understanding, the free version does not allow phone participation. The paid version does, but it's not actually perfect. So basically they give you a list of phone numbers and you want to find the one that has the area code closest to you. So for those of us that are in cities, major cities, it's fine. Like there's like 2 Calgary-based area codes, for instance, if I'm calling in. But somebody that's out, you know, in the middle of nowhere kind of thing might have long distance charges as a result. That's something for people to just be aware of. A lot of people do have like unlimited calling within Canada and things like that as part of their cell phone plans. So they might be able to call in without penalty anyways, but it is something to think about. But lots of other platforms, I keep saying Zoom just because that's the platform that we're using right now. It's by no means the only platform. We at ALUS Canada, we've used Uber Conference as well. It does have a good call-in option. as well as a video option. I know Alberta Agriculture, you guys like GoToWebinar or GoToMeeting. There's tons of different platforms out there. Like, I would really encourage you to do your research and find the one that works for you. But it is a good point. Having that phone participation, I think, is a really good sort of bullet to have on your shopping list for this kind of software, especially if you're going to be working with producers. Okay, so just an aside on, just because we mentioned social media, ALUS Canada has kind of changed our social media strategies just in light of COVID-19. So we'll just share that with you in case it's helpful to your organizations. It's just basically the recognition that business as usual might not work right now. We do need to be really aware of the situation, what's going on from day to day. People might be scared, they might be nervous, they might be looking for a break from doom and gloom and serious topics. And scheduled posts are noticed a mile away. I follow one of our funding organizations, for example, and they clearly had some scheduled posts for an event that had been canceled several weeks ago, but they hadn't taken those scheduled posts down. And so when they went up, I was like, okay guys, I'm pretty sure this is canceled, right? People are noticing that. If you're posting pictures of like your outreach events from previous seasons, that's another thing to be a little bit cautious of. People are a little bit hyper aware of group shots right now. So we're kind of recommending doing the solo shots, pictures on the farm, that kind of thing, and just being really positive and focusing on those kinds of things. So just an aside. Okay, so step it up one more notch. Of course, there's webinars. I don't want to beat it to death, but doing them live, but recording them so that they can be watched on demand. Always record everything if you can, because you never know when you're going to need it. It might just sit in your back pocket, sort of for personal use. The next time you're talking to a producer, oh, I had a similar conversation with so-and-so, a week ago. Let me pull that up for you. Or you might be able to repurpose them for your social media or other things like that. But also webcam conversations. So one-on-one calls, if you're just calling a producer, and I keep saying producer, but your outreach client, whether that's, producer or staff of an organization or whatever. This actually came from Kim Cornish at Food Water Wellness Foundation. She mentioned that even before COVID, often what she was doing to sort of set up her soil samples was FaceTiming with the producers. It wasn't a phone call, and people seemed to be really accepting and willing to do that kind of thing. And it's something like 90% of our communication happens through body language. So personally, I hate the phone. I have huge phone anxiety, and I think it's because you don't have that sort of face-to-face. You can't read the smile in someone's eyes or something like that to see if they're kind of getting it, or if you're way off base and completely alienating them. Podcasts too. This is another great time to develop some content for some of these out-of-the-box ideas. Online communities too. So a lot of our people might already be in, I'm just going to admit somebody to the room. They might already be using a lot of platforms. So, go where the people are. If you find your people are using a particular tool like Facebook or LinkedIn, set up a group on there. At ALUS Canada, we use Slack for our internal communications, and we did send out a rural extension staff Slack channel so that our broader extension community can kind of have some casual conversation. So we can post that link as well. Or Mobilize or web forums like that. also work really well. Call-in resources. So this is an idea kind of stemming from, if you remember back in the day and you would dial in and call the movie theater and somebody would reel off, oh, you can see Nightmare Before Christmas at 7 p.m. or Transformers at 8, that kind of thing. There's no reason we can't do some of that. If you have sort of a list of frequently asked questions that you're constantly getting, it might be useful to set up kind of an FAQ line where it's unmanned. People could still leave you a voicemail and you would obviously still want to get back to them. But if people are just kind of looking for that quick and dirty stuff, it's an option. I use line2.com for one of my hobbies, and it works pretty well. It's like a web-based phone line, and you could set up something like that through that, and pretty cheap. If you had content like a documentary or something like that, you could also host a watch party and just kind of make things fun. And similar to those call-in resources, chatbots on your social media pages can be really helpful, just to make sure that if you don't have somebody monitoring it 24/7, at least people get a response. So you can, again, set those up with some frequently asked questions. The best practice with chatbots, though, is you really want to make sure that a real person then follows up with them and they have that real contact. Otherwise, they're just talking to a robot, and nobody likes it. But it is nice if somebody sends you a message at midnight, so you can, they can at least get a little bit of information. So podcasts, or I'm just pulling out as an example of something you could look at doing. A lot of these content producers, like podcasts or maybe like YouTube video content producers, they're looking for content, and the easier you can make it for them, this would go even for print media like newspapers and stuff. The easier you can make it for them, where it's plug and play and they can just kind of slide you into their regular content, the more likely they're going to share your information. And everybody in the world is pretty well overworked. So yeah, it's a good, sorry, I'm just gonna admit somebody here. It's a good way of dealing with that. Okay, some general tips. Obviously, we want to try to reduce barriers as much as possible. So, you know, when we can, let's use what people are already using. So if you're talking about setting up a Facebook group versus a LinkedIn group, for instance, and 80% of your people are already using Facebook and 10% are using LinkedIn, which one are you gonna, are you better off using as a tool? Probably your Facebook group. As much as you can make it simple to access, so just clicking a link. So like I said, sharing a recording of a webinar via YouTube where they just have to click that one link might be an easier access point for your producers than joining a Zoom call. So maybe that's their baby step one, right? And then obviously record your stuff so that you can do that. It's also a good way of you sort of working out the technical glitches too. If you're a little bit nervous about hosting these kinds of things, it's a tip as well. You could just set up kind of a test call, maybe with a friendly colleague or a friend or something, and record it. And then once you're happy with it, then you could share that if you're not comfortable doing a live event. Kind of a baby step for us. And virtual events are not much different than in-person events. You want to have an interesting event host and a good moderator to help bring in some great speakers that people really want to listen to. That's one of the advantages of doing some of these virtual events, is you might actually be able to access some speakers that you wouldn't have had access to otherwise. Like if you heard of somebody doing something really neat in Australia, for instance, you're not going to fly them out for an in-person event to give an hour talk, but you might be able to get them to do a webinar or something like that for you. And then you want to create some kind of opportunity for people to interact with each other. So, several of you joined early on the call today and had some chit chat. That's a great way of doing that. Even just the polling questions and that kind of thing. And if there's ways to personalize the experience so that people don't just feel like they're a black box on a screen, that's great too. Sharing your content, super easy these days. Add social share buttons to everything so that it is easy for people to share it via whatever platform they want, whether that's email or Facebook or Twitter or whatever. And don't be afraid to ask people to share. Like if you put it in your invitation, please share this with a friend. People are much more likely to do so than if they are not asked. And then share if you have a success story or something that worked well or didn't work well, share that with the rest of our extension community, because we are going to be learning all of this together. We're all kind of navigating uncharted waters. So the one thing with sharing that was brought up, I think it was by Trevor at Alberta Agriculture, is when possible, if you can provide a smaller resolution version of your content. So maybe you have your high quality video, but you also have a standard definition video. So YouTube does that, I believe, automatically, or it might be a box you need to check. That provides an opportunity for people with weaker internet connections to still be able to view it without having to wait forever for it to buffer and load. And also streamable seems to be preferred. So the way the systems work, if they can just stream it like YouTube or something like that, as opposed to trying to download like a video, it will load faster as well. So little tips. And like I said, these are the uncharted waters. None of us know what's going to work, what's not going to work. So let's not assume that we do. Let's try things. If you've ever had a wild and crazy and wacky idea, now's your time to give it a try, right? And then share it if it works, or share if it doesn't. And ask for that feedback so that you can adapt. Best practices if you are running webinars, sending your agendas in advance and hosting 2 or 3 time options, and or at least recording to share later, will increase the chance that people are going to have a chance to check it out. Mute everybody's audio. I always feel rude hitting that mute all button, but it really does help the audio quality, and also I think a lot of people appreciate it. I always auto mute myself because undoubtedly the dog will pick the worst time in the world to start barking. Having a moderator, so thank you, Katherine. Practice it before, break it up into shorter calls, and include breaks if it is a long presentation, and making sure that there's a call-in option, which we already talked about. And don't forget that there's humans on the other end of the line. Just like in an in-person meeting, sometimes you need to kind of coax things out of people. So starting off with some kind of an icebreaker or check-in question is a great idea. And it could be something silly. I've seen things like, everybody take a picture of your shoes and share it in the chat box, or whatever. Check-in questions might be a little more touchy-feely. So, right now when everybody's kind of going through a lot, we could ask, how's everybody coping? Or, what's the one thing you really want to do once we're able to gather again? Something like that. Make sure everyone gets a chance to talk, maybe not on webinar styles. As soon as you have more than about 4 to 6 people, it's really hard to kind of manage a discussion format, I find. But you do want to make sure that everybody has the chance if they want to. So like we did at the start of this webinar, outlining that people should and are encouraged to use the group chat option, or unmute and speak up if they want is great. If you are in those smaller sessions that you're trying to get discussion going, you might have to call on the quieter people in the room. No different than if you were in person. I find, if anything, people tend to be even quieter on webinar things because we don't want to talk over each other. But it is better than conference calls when you have crickets and then everybody tries to talk at once, because nobody can see when everybody's trying to speak. So polls are a great way of getting that engagement without like the pressure of somebody having to talk and speak in front of the group too. And then using who's unmuted as a guide for who'd like to speak next is great. And this sort of silly insider tip, when you're talking for a long time and kind of delivering a presentation like this, again, better than it is on a conference call when you're just talking to dead air. But even on webinars, it's super unnatural, especially if people don't have their webcams on. You feel like you're talking to yourself and it's awkward, and then you start answering yourself, and that just is like a sign of craziness, my mother always said. So I find it really helpful to have somebody to talk to, whether that's you tell your spouse or your roommate or whoever to sit there and just listen to you, or you grab your dog, or even a teddy bear. That can help. I think we've beat it home enough. Record your stuff, but do take a chance at some point in your webinar to, ideally at the beginning, to just pause and make sure that everybody is okay with recording. There might be somebody who's not for whatever reason, and recording obviously will depend too on the content of your meeting. If you're doing something that's private and confidential, or a one-on-one meeting, you probably don't want to record those. But it is helpful even if you're doing it just for self-evaluation. I seldom watch the full things afterwards, but I'll sort of like speed through a few clips and realize that I say a lot. So it helps work on those things. A lot of the platforms do have built-in recording functions like Zoom does, but you can also use other tools, QuickTime, Loom, Snagit. There's lots of those different things out there. I've tried Loom a little bit lately, and I quite like it because it allows for really easy editing if you want to trim off like the beginning of the call when people are chit-chatting, or maybe trim out a break or something like that. Okay, so again, just like an in-person event, make sure your content is engaging and actionable. After the event, if somebody can go and take like whatever little nugget you've talked about and put it into action immediately, or pretty close to immediately, they're much more likely to do something with it. So, if you're talking about some, broad scale, big issue, like, I don't know, natural infrastructure or something, but then you have a small actionable piece, I would highlight that. And if you can provide some kind of benefit for people coming, so maybe it is interesting content, maybe it's that speaker from Australia that they would never have had a chance to hear, maybe it's that they get a certificate of attendance at the end that they can throw on their LinkedIn profile, maybe they get an entry to a draw, right? Especially if we're cutting costs on lunches and stuff like that, maybe we can get a $20 gift, Tim's gift card, and everybody's name goes into the draw. Okay, a couple little tools. If you need to build consensus with a big group, I've not used this tool, but I stumbled upon it. It's called Synthetron. It's based out of Belgium, I think. But essentially, it's kind of like a focus group. People have live chats, but they're anonymous. And then their team, through their algorithm and a moderator, takes all of that information and kind of pulls out the nuggets, and it makes for a safe discussion space and scalable. So thought I would share just because we stumbled upon it and it seemed like it could be interesting. Similarly, Othello, I have not tried this one either. It's a Canadian company, and it's more for trying to build consensus within a group where you have kind of like a voting thing. So again, it uses an algorithm, and it's kind of like a KT analysis where you kind of pit options against each other and ask the questions differently, and eventually it kind of moves everybody into one sort of general area of support. So just shared those as like random little tools that I've come across that could be useful to our extension work. Getting in front of new audiences, partner with the other agencies to share your info on their platforms and vice versa. Don't be afraid to ask to be featured. And like we said, if you can make it plug and play, people are more likely to run it. And right now is kind of an interesting time in terms of maybe corporate partners in your area, because they're facing business interruptions. So it might not be a good time for them to be promoting their products and things like that, because they can't actually get up there and do their work. But they still want to stay engaged with their customers. So how can they do that? Well, one example might be to share your educational information. So a good example might be solar watering systems, right? If they're not out there installing and doing that kind of thing, they might be able to share projects that have used those systems and share that information about how to implement them and the environmental benefits. Okay, so that was all the kind of boring how-to stuff. Now I just want to kind of brainstorm some fun out-of-the-box ideas. This is where you have a chance to just get wild and crazy. Like, I think right now there is no such thing as a bad idea. Well, maybe there is, but brainstorm, put them down on paper, talk to your coworkers, talk to us, and see what might work. Here's a couple wild and wacky and crazy ideas that might pop up. So the No Travel Conference. So I've attended a few of these in the last couple of weeks, where it's kind of like a whole day conference, just like you would attend a live session. The advantage, again, is that you can bring in expertise from anywhere in the world. You can really engage with new audiences outside of maybe a local environment, or maybe it is hyper-local. Totally up to you. And the advantage, of course, is that it has a lower carbon footprint. Nobody's flying anywhere, all of that kind of stuff. And you can leverage those really high interest speakers through collaboration. So, maybe your local watershed association might not have kind of enough pull or enough budget for speaker fees or whatever to do something like this. But maybe if you partnered with all the watershed associations in Alberta, you could pull together a really interesting conference. Sort of a smaller idea of that is taking the TED Talks kind of format, those small mini topics, either the sort of 10-minute sessions or maybe hour sessions, making those really easily shareable through YouTube links or something like that, have some kind of an inspirational, make them really exciting. And they can be as simple as a smartphone video. Maybe it's one of your producers out there showing their project that they've worked on, and they're just sharing that passion. And you can just edit it a little bit and get it up there.
Amber just sent a message about a conference coming up called iMedia. So she said that she went a few years ago in Edmonton and it was super useful, focused on social media marketing. And so this year they're going to be doing it online. So that would be great as an opportunity to learn from that format and kind of see how the online conference would work. So yeah, Amber, if you are attending that, definitely take some notes and then you can share it to us through Slack.
Yeah, great. I love that. Yeah, not an agricultural group. Yeah, and that's the thing. There's a lot of really great resources out there that are outside of our realm that maybe we have the opportunity to see now. And there's a number of, again, there's software platforms you can use for those virtual conferences. Bizibo and Zofo Backstage, ZOFO, are two that I've participated in the last couple of weeks, and both of those seem to work really well. So yeah, there's kind of an app for everything. If there's something you want to do, chances are somebody's invented a way for you to do it. Okay, desktop picnics. You know, we're all pretty familiar with lunch and learns, and it sounds a little stale to me. So call it a desktop picnic. Sometimes all it takes is a change of words, and people are intrigued. They're like, what is this? Well, grab your lunch, have a picnic at your desk, and learn about whatever topic you're trying to share information about. Mention these watch parties quickly. Netflix has kind of a built-in system. It's like Chrome extension, but there's other ways of doing them. You could stream something via Zoom or whatever. But basically offering the opportunity to watch some kind of interesting film or documentary or some piece that you've put together. And then you can include maybe an introduction or little breaks that include some of your outreach information.
This is also a good opportunity if you're doing a watch party to have your presenters send in their content beforehand, just so you can make sure that everything moves on time and runs smoothly. So one of the organizations that I work with, we are going to have on Earth Day a bunch of videos that we're going to stream, and then the speakers from the videos will be available after as a panel.
That's a great idea. And the thing actually I wanted to mention on watch parties too is you might have to check in, like if you're using produced content, like a Netflix watch party or something like that, you probably don't have the legal rights to share that. So you might just need to check into that if you're doing it as like a public screening. But if you're doing it as an individual sort of thing with maybe a few producers, you might have the ability to do that. So just the caveat, not a lawyer. Okay, another silly thing, totally inspired by Brad Paisley and Keith Urban and Elton John and all of these people doing their little like live concerts from their living room. But something like the farmhouse sessions, have a local band play and stream it live, and then in between their sets, share information about your topics as intermission pieces. Just anything like that that might sort of engage an audience, because they might not come to learn about electric fencing or something, but they might come for something that's kind of fun, and then if they get that information in between, bonus. Another fun idea is virtual happy hours or coffee dates or tea parties, call it whatever you want. Great alternative to one-on-one outreach, you know, and instead of scheduling a meeting with somebody like you would in the past, invite them to, you know, let's have coffee over Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever the case may be. Really low-key option for group settings. So maybe you have a few producers you want to get together and just kind of touch base and have like a nice open discussion. It's a good way of doing it without a lot of pressure. A book club. Why not suggest topical books of interest or books that are available on Audible or other audiobook options. And then you have conversation that then spins around related to your outreach. Again, just a different way of trying to get at those people. Virtual field trips or virtual talent shows, you know, getting your producers to show off their projects. Maybe you could do that through a little bit of a contest or something like that. You could compile the videos, do a whole social media series about it, And it really gives your producers a chance to show off their pride and enthusiasm in their projects and the things that they're doing on the ground. And I think it's also a really good opportunity to do behind the scenes tours. So we tend to do a lot of tours as extension staff, certainly within ALUS. It's a kind of a popular MO, but there's a lot of places that you can't go just because you can't get a group of 50 people traipsing through an area that's hard to access, or you can't go because of biosecurity issues. You can't go into the chicken barn or whatever, but you can take your camera in some of those areas. So good way to share some of that kind of content. And nature breaks, if you're a producer's out on your project and just sees like a nice peaceful thing, people need these kinds of stress relief. So it's a good time to share these little pieces of nature and maybe share one little educational tidbit in it. If you're handy, you could also guide people through a tutorial live. Again, live stream it. I followed one of a guided tutorial a couple weeks ago. It was a guy who was making a mask, but why couldn't it be making bird boxes or hen houses or installing your riparian fencing system? Anything of interest. And the common objection to the webinars and stuff that keeps coming up time and time again is people either don't have the internet connectivity or the technical skills to access it. Okay, do they have a DVD player? Maybe you could just snail mail them a copy of your recording and they can watch it like that, right? DVDs are really cheap, a buck for your stamp, and maybe, I don't even know what the cost of DVDs are because I haven't bought one in a long time, but 50 cents or something might be a great way of reaching some of those producers that are not going to jump online for you. Similarly, this idea came from a person in Edmonton who was doing these caring cards. And basically she was dropping off these little postcards at her neighbor's house saying, hey, if you can't leave your house, you need groceries, whatever, I'm here for you. Here's my name and contact information. It was just a way of reaching out neighbor to neighbor. And it kind of got me thinking, the art of letter writing is kind of lost. I love getting handwritten mail in the mail. One of my coworkers loves to send little note cards every now and then. And I always get so excited when I receive one, even though I talk to her every day. So, why can't we use this? Maybe it's not a sustainable option to, handwrite 300 notes to send out to, all the producers. But if you had maybe like 5 producers that you kind of had on the hook to do a project or that you really wanted to connect with this year, like kind of make your goal list, they might be the right sort of target audience to send a little handwritten note and just say, hey, I'm Christine, I wanted to reach out to you, here's what I do, blah, blah, blah. And that they realize that there's a real person, and it's pretty hard to ignore a handwritten note. And like, we're Canadian, we don't like to be rude, right? Chances are you'll get a response from it. So in just making the most of your time, if you have extra time, some people are finding themselves with more time on their hand, others are not. But if you're one of those ones that does, it is a good time to do some of the things that have kind of been on your back burner list. So make your content that is going to last you a while, that you can share over and over and over again for the next couple of years. Do those how-to webinars for some of your basic projects or your FAQs on paperwork or whatever. Create an explainer video, do a one-pager, do a fact sheet, do an infographic. Whatever the case may be, it's a good chance to do that. Infographics are really really great because they can be shared in a lot of those different formats we've already talked about. And high quality infographics are apparently 30 times more likely to be read than text articles. So it's a good excuse to do it. And there's a lot of free editing software out there. I use canva.com for a lot of things. The one pager that we'll send out after this call was designed on Canva. And if you're not comfortable doing things like graphic design, or you want to make like an animated explainer video or something and don't even know where to start, you're not alone. There are so many freelancer sites these days with people who are willing to do those things, and usually pretty cheap. So, Fiverr, Upwork, Freelancer, all of those are options. And often you can get like an infographic designed for like $10. Might be a really valuable way of changing some of your funding over if you have that flexibility. And just let people know that you're available for these kinds of conversations. So, if you have a Skype username, or a Zoom link or whatever that you want to put into your e-signature, just as a recognition that you're open for that kind of thing. It's just another reminder. And holding space for conversation. This is something Rural Roots to Climate Solutions has done a couple of different options, is just basically providing an open time for discussion, and whoever joins, and then you just kind of let people's discussion take them from there. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Laura to talk about how to evaluate your work.
Thanks, Christine.
Yeah,
so this is just some quick things to consider. It's always important to think about your surveys sort of well in advance, so that you really are able to identify those must-need information and what's really important to you, just so we're not overburdening our survey respondents. So when you're identifying those important information needs, kind of think about what it is you want to know, and it's going to be different for every sort of situation, especially if you're maybe new to this type of platform. You might want to know your participants' preferences. Is there a preferred time of day that they're more able to participate in a webinar versus a different time of day? You might also want to get some feedback on the participants' experience as well, especially with some of the rural connectivity. How is that working for participants, and how could you maybe troubleshoot some of those things? You might want just some general feedback so that you can improve your webinar or your online training tool. And also, if you are receiving funding for certain things, then you might want to consider that this is a way to get feedback for some of your reporting requirements back to your funders. So that, it's good to really identify what are those must needs, so that you're going to use all of the information that you're asking participants to give you. You don't want to overburden them with maybe questions that you might not actually end up using in the end. And then another way to think about is, how do you want to best collect that information? And it's good to think about this stuff ahead of time so that you can maybe plan some things. So you might want to either plan some in-session polls like Christine did with us earlier in this session. You might want to do a pre and post survey. So if you're gathering information on what did your clients learn, did you increase their learning? Then you might want to ask a question or two in the beginning about what is their sort of knowledge level of a certain subject, and then at the end of the webinar session, ask that question again and see if that increased. And then you'd want to obviously create those survey questions ahead of time if you're going to do a post-session survey, just so that you can send out that survey link immediately. And then that's going to encourage some participation. If there's a time lag between, then you're going to probably lose some participation in your survey. And then obviously test your survey with others. I've done a lot of surveying myself, and I still send it even to just a handful of people to say, can you look at this survey? And the feedback that you can get is only going to improve your survey and improve the experience for the participants doing your survey. And that's really important. So that's just a couple of things to consider. And then on the quick tips, these are a little bit more about survey design and things to think about when you're actually crafting your survey questions. So you really want to stick with positive language. So rather than having language around do nots, it's more focused on what do people do. Stick to one subject per question. You don't want to sort of have double-barreled questions or compound questions when you're asking two things in one question, because then the participants don't really know what to answer because they only have one answer or one place that they can answer, but then you've asked two questions. Plain language, now's not the time to use terms that going to be familiar with, so just keep it clear and simple, and that can really help the respondents to provide you with the best information because they've understood the question. No acronyms, just avoid acronyms at all costs. Your clear quantification, so what that means, and instead of asking using words like few, many, be more specific, say one or two, 3 or 4. Try to keep those quantifications fairly clear. And then also limit your mental math. Mental math is not one of my favorite things to do. So if you're asking questions around maybe what people might be doing in a month, so rather than saying how many times in a month do you do this, you might want to narrow that down to either a day or a week, so they're not having to do so much mental math thinking, well, I do this about 5 times a week, so that means I do it 20 times a month. Like, just cut that out for them and just ask them for the week, and that can make saves the respondent that time and that effort of doing the mental math, which then can fatigue your. And then open-ended questions. They can be great, however, use them sparingly and keep them very clear. I have seen surveys where almost every question is accompanied by an open-ended sort of question, and that can be really taxing. Open-ended questions require a lot more effort from the respondents rather than just clicking a box or two. And then it's also important to, when you go into if you're using an open-ended question, have an interpretation or coding strategy. So how are you going to code the responses so that you can group them and come up with their themes and get your answers? So it's good to think about even to that detail if you're going to use an open-ended question. So yeah, that's just quickly some things to consider when you're going to try to get some feedback, either to improve your webinar or get information for funders or whatever. It's good to consider this stuff up ahead. And then some quick tips. I did do a tip sheet that either Katherine, I think Katherine will send that out after the webinar, that talks a lot about this stuff, but in a little bit more detail here. Right, that's all I had.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Laura. I have a delivery truck outside my house, so I apologize if the dogs go crazy in a second. Okay, so I just want to sort of open the floor and open it up to everybody to brainstorm on any idea you have for outreach, any wild and wacky ideas sitting and percolating in your brains. Want to share? can unmute or you can share it in the chat box and I can do a whiteboard if you're interested. No? Okay, well, it's early in the morning. Feel free to, if something pops into your mind, feel free to keep adding it. Yeah, so let's do another poll. So after this, you know, how would you like to engage with your outreach clients? So we're gonna do. Okay, you should see the poll on your screen. And while you guys are answering that, I'm just gonna grab that door to be super rude. Okay, so sorry about that. Let's share these. All right, so it's looking like webinars are probably going to be the most common coming up. And then seeing lots of chat, which is great. Webinars and emails to email lists. Great. By phone. Video recordings, PowerPoints with voiceovers. Yeah, that's another really good idea as well. Yeah, and a variety of things, yeah. Podcasts, neat. So that actually podcast is a good example. The next questions we're gonna ask are kind of around where do we want to go from here? What other tools or resources would be helpful to everybody? So that's a good potential example. We do have somebody who's willing to do a session on kind of how to do a podcast. So if that's something that's of interest, like let us know. And ramp up engagement in webinars and video field days and social media and that kind of thing. And Lorraine says, would it work to encourage people to watch a webinar hosted by another agency on their own time, then schedule a time for group discussion Q&A at another time? That's a really interesting idea, Lorraine. I think, yeah, I think that would be really neat. Why don't you give it a try and let us know how it works?
Kind of like a book club, sort of, by encouraging everyone to consume the content and then discuss later. That's great.
Yeah, it is really cool. And another option of doing that would be to do that like watch party kind of thing too. Yeah, cool. Yeah, get wild and crazy with your ideas, because you never know what's going to work until you try it, right? So how do we move this beyond the pandemic? I think the best value we can get out of this really unique opportunity is to think with the long term. How can we get the most value out of these things now and in the future? So, you know, moving into the future, we might find that offering an event in person, but also having the equipment going to stream it live or stream it online or record it to put online later might actually help to increase our demographic, right? Like we kind of talked before, yeah, this year we're probably going to miss some of those people that are just not willing to do the online thing. well, we would get them at the live event. And then conversely, you're not going to get everybody at the live event because they're just too busy, or they live too far away, or whatever the case may be, but they might listen to the online events. So, by offering the tandem solution, hopefully you've cast that net that much wider, right? You can also use some of your remote options as teasers to build your audience for in-person attendance. So maybe you could post little snippets of the content via social media or via your e-newsletters or whatever the case may be. And I think we're going to start seeing more and more remote offices and people building this kind of capability into their day-to-day lives. So I think coming out of this, I think we'll see a lot more of this kind of thing happening in our world and in the broader world as well. So, and just best practices, once we do manage to gather for groups again, things are not going to go back to normal. There's going to be some higher expectations in terms of, spacing and capacity in rooms and things like that. I think people are going to want a little more space for quite a while after this. They're going to want to make sure that they have options for hand sanitizer or hand washing facilities for sure. And it should go without saying, but if people are sick, they should stay home. So, it's really hard to do that, like, especially if you're the presenter and you're sick. What do? You cancel the event. But these are things that I think are going to be much more prevalent in our public consciousness once we do gather again.
I just wanted to note, Amber had been kind of experimenting with Grow before this pandemic about doing the live streaming of events. So they're all on the Facebook page for Gateway Research Organization. So if you wanted to take a look at kind of how she set it up when she was doing it, it was super useful because her events were out in Westlock and I'm in Edmonton. So I was able to still engage in her events while in the office. So that was super awesome. So that'll be really helpful. So if she had a tripod and a phone and had it set up and going while presenting. So it was super cool.
That's great. Or if you want to share any of those links in Slack or in the chat box, that would be great. I think people would maybe be interested in seeing those.
It was actually just on Facebook Live. Like that was how easy it was simply a tripod phone, click on Facebook Live and just record, and that was it. And we ended up having a ton of views on it. Like really, really.
Very cool. Yeah, that's the thing. It's so easy to do a lot of this stuff now. Like how silver linings, right? Trying to be the optimist. Like in a pandemic, it's kind of cool that it's happening in 2020, right? Whether we have the ability to stay home and do a lot of our work from home, do a lot of these things really easily, and like binge Netflix when we're off. It could be a lot worse. We could be doing this in the 90s with MTV to watch only. Yeah, so I think we just want to open it up for discussion. Either unmute, use the chat window. We're sort of interested in what are the next steps? Where do we go from here to help our community figure out how to move forward in the next little bit? How do we sort of set up a community of best practice? And is there like maybe a central place that people should post their resources, that kind of thing? I'll maybe try to share the Slack invite link because that was one option we've been exploring. But yeah, open the floor. What resources would be helpful for you? Like, do you want a deeper dive into using a particular technology or platform? Do you want a deeper dive into like storytelling and sharing information in a digital world, podcasting?
We talked about, Christine and I have talked about setting time for if you're not able to get help from a coworker or a friend or someone like that to do a practice run of you hosting a webinar. So if you've been a participant before on something like Zoom or GoTo, but you've never actually been the host, that's something that if you would like help with, we can definitely help you with that too, and just be your test audience. But I definitely would encourage using these tools with family or friends as well. So that way you can kind of get more comfortable with it. And I think it's easier to kind of mute someone that you know and unmute them than just trying to do it with someone you don't really know. So getting familiar with the tools is the best way for you to have a successful event as well. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like the first time I used Zoom, I actually just watched a movie with a friend and practiced polling, practiced muting, all of that kind of stuff. So Lorraine said, Alberta Ag keeping written resources. I like to have written resources to link to following a presentation. Makes for good website content for us too.
Definitely, yeah.
Lorraine, is there anything specific that you're looking for? And Brad says, is there any concerns regarding the security issues of Zoom? I understand that there's been many instances of third-party hacking into the feed. Is there any more secure options with end-to-end encryption? And we talked a little bit about that last time. Katherine, do you want to?
Yeah, for sure. So I think with Zoom, so some of the issues surrounding using webinar software like this would be that anyone with the link can join. So there's certain steps you can take to kind of make sure that you're being a little bit more secure. So one of the things we did today that we could have done that would make us a little bit more safe would have been to use a random meeting ID or to use a password. But since we're not really talking about anything confidential, it's okay that we didn't do that. Make sure that, I guess one of my tools that I would suggest is, yeah, using the waiting room option. So you can't just join in. As a host, you can see the person's name and then you can allow them to join in. So if it's someone's name that you're not recognizing, you can actually just block them from entering to begin with. And then just make sure you use tools like having everyone muted. Don't allow for the whiteboard feature unless that's something that you want to allow. You can even have people's cameras blocked. You can have a whole realm of control. So that's something you can do. And then, yeah, creating the random meeting ID and password. Setting the password just as an extra step that people can't then just guess your meeting ID and log in. And then one thing that I would suggest too is definitely don't share the Zoom links on your social media platforms. You can say, I'm hosting a webinar. If you're interested in signing up, send me a message or send me an email, and then I'll send you the information. So that just helps to control who has access, and then making sure that the rules are clear too. So some of those concerns that were around Zoom, I'm not really sure about any other security issues with the platform, but there are also other platforms like GoTo and as Christina said, Uber Conference, there's Google Hangouts, there's tons of tools. So if you're concerned about Zoom or your organization is suggesting you don't use it, then that's totally fine. I know Government of Alberta is recommending that we use other softwares if possible, but these are the tips that they gave if you are going to use Zoom.
Yeah, that's great. I think no matter what you're going to use, I think you need to do a little bit of research, make sure it is the right fit for you, and pay attention to the kind of content. Like, I mean, we're talking here content that we're trying to get out into the public domain for the most part. So we're not talking about confidential meetings and things like that. So maybe some of these things are less of a concern. That said, the more things that are coming out in the last couple of weeks about Zoom specifically, maybe it isn't going to be the best thing going forward because maybe some offices are going to block it or something like that. So definitely a good question.
I think, hi.
Hi.
Sorry, I hear me. Sorry. I think one of the things that also maybe that would be helpful is as extension people are going forward and trying these things out, is if we could come back in maybe like a meeting or something like this and just talk about kind of the, learn from their experiences, like what worked well, what didn't work well, what did you try? And then just with more specific examples, instead of, like here's some, a plethora of ideas, is like, what are people actually doing and finding that works with like an agricultural type audience.
It's a great idea. So, so are you imagining kind of like holding space, like kind of sort of a general open discussion that, we just host, once a month or every 2 weeks or something like that?
Yeah, no, exactly. Like just maybe in a month or so to see what people have tried and, what worked. I don't know. I assume, we're all going to take this and try something, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that that sounds like a great idea.
It's an easy. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I shared the invitation to join Slack if you're interested in that. It's another good way of kind of casually sharing that information, sharing a link to a webinar you've done or asking for somebody to lend a hand to be a test audience for you. I think Katherine mentioned that her and I are both open to doing that. I think on the last call too, we did have a question about whether people might be able to sort of borrow each other's like Zoom accounts or GoToMeetings accounts and things like that too. And I think there's some of us are open to that, like within the realm of reasonability, the odd meeting here and there, if it works within schedules and stuff. So if that's something that's helpful, certainly for the ALUS people on the call, I can do that easy peasy for you guys for sure, but others as well, I'm happy to help.
Yeah, if you're kind of looking at just sort of doing like a one-time webinar kind of thing, then it might not make sense to purchase a subscription to a website if you're only going to use it once. So you can definitely get in contact with me or with Christine, and we can sit in and be a host with you for that kind of session or something like that. But yeah, if it's a weekly meeting kind of session that you're looking at setting up, it might make sense to purchase the account for your organization.
Yeah. One-time thing too, though, a lot of these programs offer free trials, like 14-day trials. So if you're just doing it once, you could probably get away with it.
That's true.
That's a great point.
The other thing I wanted to share earlier was the idea of just holding like a tech space too. So like if you are hosting a webinar or something like that, or maybe like in the ALUS folks realm, maybe like a PAC meeting or something like that, and you're not sure that everybody's comfortable using the technology, you could also set up maybe a half-hour window or an hour window where you're willing to just sit on your platform, Zoom or whatever, and be there so that people can practice joining and work out any technical bugs in advance of your webinar without the pressure of your webinar starting in 5 minutes. That can be really helpful as well. So yeah, and again, happy to help with that kind of thing if you just want another troubleshooter on the line. Yeah, cool. Well, we are now over time, so I want to thank you all for coming, and hopefully you got something out of this. Katherine and Laura would love to hear if you have ideas or things that you want to share with the rest of the group. Maybe we can help facilitate that. But yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Whoops, I didn't do that.